District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program. Welcome to District of Conservation. I'm your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. Thanks to new and returning listeners for finding District of Conservation and staying with us, especially as all these breaking developments and such occur. For the 8+ years we've been doing this podcast, my goal is to keep everything pithy, interesting, and relatable to the topic. And today, I'm going to briefly talk about Charlie Kirk's legacy on conservative conservationism. I think there's a tie-in, and I'll explain my connection to him because I did know him briefly, and we walked in similar political circles. So I want to tribute to him what he did, giving folks like me a platform and stuff he said and did with respect to the Second Amendment, hunting, and the like. And then we're going to also talk about a very interesting story about two Cornell bear hunters who I think people were trying to get canceled when it was revealed that they harvested a bear lawfully and decided to skin it on campus. No charges, of course, because why would you charge them for doing something lawfully? So we're going to break down these two topics as concisely as possible. So stay with me today on this. I know the death of Charlie Kirk, his assassination, is hanging over the heads of many people, myself included, who worked in the conservative movement. And while I did not know Charlie Kirk very intimately, we did know each other. I wish I gotten to know him better. I think the last time I spoke to him was 2016 at NRA annual meetings. That was the last time I think we had exchanged anything. Nothing bad because life gets busy, life changes, and the like. But I was looking over initial connections and messages we shared, and he first interviewed me, reached out to me in 2012 when I was a co-author of this young conservative book, and I did an interview with him and was subsequently quoted in the piece. We traveled the same circles. We went to CPAC. We went to different events between 2012, 2016. My old workplace, I believe he went to do some trainings there. And how this relates to conservation, that's where I'm getting at. But I wanted to preface my discussion of his impact and what effect his loss has on conservation. There, like I said, there is a tie-in. I'm seeing people, before I even discuss the platform he gave folks like me through his Turning Point USA organization, but I see people in the hunting and fishing space, fellow hunters and anglers who are not really political, mourning his death, and that is to show kind of what far-reaching effects he had, which is fascinating. Non-political people, maybe quiet conservatives, fellow conservatives, and to see so many people in the hunting and fishing industry offer their condolences, you know that he just didn't have an impact on conservative politics, which is where my home is and how I sprung board to conservation politics. I've always been an angler, conservationist, etc. from the get-go, but I've worked in both industries. I still work in both industries, and not only just hunting and fishing too, but energy and the like. And Charlie Kirk, even though I didn't talk to him for a long time, I would always watch his clips from afar, and he really debunked the crazy climate alarmist stuff. I don't want to forget that either, because in addition to having speakers like me talk to his different groups, he himself waded into the Second Amendment issues. He talked about energy independence. He talked about different things. And actually, at the time of the debate over public lands being included in one big beautiful bill, he actually broke some news. I did not watch the episode. I don't know if he fully agreed with Senator Lee's deposal of federal lands, which I disagreed with in the way that he presented it. There's already lawful means to, in a very small effort to sell certain public lands. We already have a mechanism if there is that need and interest, but I'm against a wholesale transfer of public lands. But I saw that Charlie Kirk, back in June, had the senator on to talk about him deciding to shrink his proposal, which I'll include in the show notes. So he did a little bit wade into these issues, even though he was not directly necessarily involved in the day-to-day battles. But his Turning Point organization was very welcoming to speakers like me. And I think maybe Kirk remembered our connections. He didn't disapprove of what I said. So, of course, he was probably still involved and very much involved in what kind of speakers were talking before his groups. So I'm grateful to him, even in our years of not talking. Again, it's nothing bad. It was just life gets busy. He was building an empire in a sense, and you just don't talk to everyone. A lot of people wanted to be in his orbit, and you put your time and efforts elsewhere. But I was always very cordial with him. Never had anything bad happen between us. It's just life gets busy, and you don't talk to everyone, and you lose touch with people. And so I was able to take my conservationist conservative lecture to many groups. I've spoken at Texas A&M. Most recently, I spoke at Sonoma State University in California about the Second Amendment. I spoke at UNC Asheville and a handful of other places to Turning Point organizations. I don't have anything lined up for the fall, but I have spoken to his group for the last 2 to 3 years, Turning Point groups. They've requested me to speak because they appreciate what I say. I spoke at Florida State University as well. Many organizations, campus organizations, TPUSA groups, throughout the last few years, wanting me to talk about the connection between political conservatism and conservationism. And I also want to mention, outside of why I was grateful to him and his organization for giving me a platform, even though I was a little, advanced in my career. I remember him reaching out to me and thinking I was already established, even though we were both traveling in the same circles. I'm a few years older than him. And I was very flattered that he reached out to me in 2012 to interview me. And like I said, even though we didn't really speak in recent years, like I was appreciative of the indirect elevation of my talking points and my speeches that he gave through his organization and the employees I worked directly with at TPUSA. But I'm not the only person. So recently, in recent years, Turning Point USA and International Order of T. Roosevelt had a hunting and conservation partnership. So they had a partnership to promote hunting and at-risk wildlife habitat conservation. And Charlie Kirk is quoted as saying, "We believe America's best environmentalists are its hunters and outdoorsmen. International Order of T. Roosevelt is leading the fight against liberal activist attacks against America's heritage of hunting and the Second Amendment." And you can read more about this partnership with respect to TPUSA, Week of Action, and just different groups. So you would see IOTR and TPUSA materials at different events that I spoke at, and then at campus events nationwide if people were talking about this subject. And it wasn't just this partnership in him speaking at NRA annual meetings, talking about these issues in debates and conversations and interviews. And I know he, like I said, on his podcast, he talked to Senator Lee about this. And granted, I didn't watch the interview, but the fact that Lee announced that he was winnowing down his plan on his show was very groundbreaking and I think important. And I think you can go back and watch that conversation if you want to see where Charlie Kirk weighs in on issues like that more broadly and more directly. And I want to mention a couple other people who probably knew him even earlier than I did. This was very interesting to see from Craig Boddington. He says that Charlie Kirk was probably 15 years old when I first met him. At a young age, he was already a hunter, shooter, and a firm Second Amendment advocate. He says that at the time I was on the boards of Coughlin and Weatherby Foundations, Charlie impressed us, and we brought him into the fold and did what we could to support him as he grew his then fledgling Turning Point USA movement. Even then, still in high school, Charlie was obviously brilliant and passionate, well-read, and well-spoken, a born leader, not so much ambitious, but a young man on a mission. And he said how much he was impressed, even bemused, at how effective a voice he was becoming. So Craig Boddington is a pretty prominent conservation voice. Take what you will, what he said as well. And there were a couple others I saw. Sporting Classics paid tribute. Christy Titus, a dear friend of mine, paid a nice tribute to him. Like I said, a lot of people in the hunting and fishing space who are either openly conservative or quietly conservative were impacted by him. They knew him, they met him, and they knew him more intimately than I did. Through going to his different various events. But like I said, we were fellow travelers in young conservative politics in the late 2010s. It was a very small group. And to see that transfer over to conservation and his impact transfer to conservation speaks volumes. And I want to leave this off before I wade into the other topic about the Cornell bear hunters. But his wife, who is very strong, like to deliver a speech, his widow to deliver that speech 2 days after your husband's assassinated takes a lot of tenacity and grit. And she might be someone to carry on his torch, and perhaps in this space too. But she had said something very interesting about where he drew his inspiration. Of course, he was very religious, but he said something interesting, which is a great roundup for why he had an impact on conservation, even indirectly with this. But she said, if you recall in his speech, Charlie loved life. He loved his life. He loved America. He loved nature, which helped him always bring him closer to God. And you don't have to be religious to relate to this statement. I think a lot of people find connection with God or a higher power through the great outdoors, and it's clearly evident that he did, even though he wasn't necessarily fighting these conservation battles directly alongside a lot of us. He was talking about these topics most recently with Senator Lee about his disposal of public lands as recent as June. But he was a very avowed Second Amendment supporter. He talked about energy realism, the need for that. He elevated a lot of people in conservative conservationism. I'm not the only person. Whether it was, I didn't never worked for him. Like I said, we were coming up at the same time in conservative politics, but so many of my friends in conservation or politics got a job from him, credit him with a lot of different opportunities. And you can't help but think, what more could he have done? Like I said, I regret that I didn't get to talk to him sooner or catch up with him in recent years. I would have loved to have seen what his thoughts were about conservative conservationism more directly. But I know through his handlers and his employees and different student activists I worked with that he, I guess, somewhat valued or appreciated that I was talking to his organization and to his student groups through this venue. So it's very tragic what happened to him last week. I hope you join me in keeping his wife and 2 kids in your thoughts and prayers. Definitely going to be uplifting him in that, especially as his upcoming funeral happens, a big memorial happening next Sunday. But he did leave an indelible mark, not only in politics, but I would say quite a bit in conservation, hunting, and fishing. Like I said, he was more directly involved in politics, but you saw his impact. You couldn't help but see his impact with the different posts and tributes I saw from hunting organizations. Field and Stream posted a tribute to him. Almost everyone, prominent accounts, prominent publications, prominent podcasters saw something in him and related to him, especially when they found out that he was also a avid outdoorsman, defender of the Second Amendment, and a supporter of climate and energy realism. So rest in peace, Charlie, and thank you. We'll continue your good work. And let's keep his family and his colleagues in our thoughts and prayers if we can. Something to brighten the week. I know it's been heavy with Charlie Kirk's unfortunate, untimely passing and assassination, but we're going to keep the positivity here too. In addition to breaking stories, we talk about good and bad stories and tragic stories. That's just the nature of things. But this is some glimmer of hope from the Ivy Leagues that I wanted to share with you. You may have seen this story circulate across social media. I figured I would give it a little bit of attention today on Monday, September 15th, ahead of a very interesting time. I'm going to reveal in the coming days and weeks some great stuff I'm working on and opportunities I'll be doing. But this story, to me, gives me a bit of hope about the Ivy Leagues and Generation Z. At Cornell University, which is an Ivy League school, although if you've been to Cornell University, and I used to work with students in the Northeast, I used to travel to Cornell University often to promote conservative politics. I wish I could speak there about conservation. Maybe there's an impetus to do so in the future with these 2 students. And if anyone is connected to these 2 Cornell students, I've made a plea on social media for if they're comfortable and want to come and speak to me in a safe setting where they can dispense their views and their experience and their love of hunting, support of conservation. I would love to speak to them. I know they probably want to be under the radar, but if they somehow are listening or someone in their orbit is listening and they feel comfortable sharing their story, this is a safe space. I hate to use that term, but this is a comfortable space where you can share being an Ivy Leaguer who goes hunting. And I welcome that if that ever happens. And if not, I'm just going to talk about the story because I think they want to protect their privacy because the news stories were trying to cancel them for skinning a bear on campus. So let's read this story from NBC News. 2 Cornell students killed bear and skin it back in their dorm. And the tagline below is the Ivy League undergrads had valid New York State hunting permits, the school said. A pair of Cornell University students killed a 120-pound black bear before bringing the carcass back to their dorm, where they skinned and butchered the remains, officials said Thursday. The 2 undergrads who had, quote, valid New York State hunting licenses killed a bear lawfully over the weekend, a Cornell spokesman said in a statement. Why does that word a statement? If it was done lawfully and legally, I don't get this. Like, they were not committing anything inhumane. I'm going to talk more in context why. Bear with me. Sorry to interject, but I want to put some context there with that. The students then, quote, brought the animal into a Cornell residence hall for processing on Saturday before a police report was made when a complaint was filed late Sunday night. So they had snitches. Of course, Ivy Leaguers especially not just Ivy Leaguers, but snitches in university campuses. Not cool. Who were trying to create and invent wrongdoing when there was none. The school official said, adding that no charges have been filed. Actually, if New York, and I believe New York has hunter harassment laws, if this fits the category of that, the student should retaliate and file and counterfile complaints of them trying to interfere, even post-hunting, anti-hunter harassment laws. I think this would fit into that. I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is if they were attacked or harassed in this manner, even post-hunting, post-kill, they should definitely seek some recourse. So let's hope that they've also looked into that if this goes even further, but hopefully not. Hopefully the university tampered any complaints, and that's what I understand to be the case. And they said no charges have been filed. An investigator with the Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC, which oversees hunting in the state, visited the school Sunday and found no cold violations. Thank goodness. The bear was killed in DEC's Region 4, which includes Delaware, Otsego, Albany, Columbia, Greene, Montgomery, Rensselaer, Schoharie, Schenectady counties, according to the agency. That means the bear wasn't killed in Tompkins County, which includes Cornell University and the city of Ithaca. Ultimately, no charges have been filed against them because they didn't engage in wrongdoing. Goodness gracious, of course there would be a classmate who would tattle on them, not understanding that if you take a bear and you don't do it lawfully, there are consequences. But good on these students for harvesting the bear and trying to normalize it, because the younger people, I think, are a little disconnected from hunting. And it goes to show that this is normal stuff that people do. Hunting, skinning a bear, it's not abnormal. I understand the bear is a apex predator to a lot of people. It's charismatic. It's cute. I love black bears. I'm Eastern European, so of course there's that connection there. I jest. But I did a bear den study. I like black bears. I also believe one day, if I'm able to and can, I would like to harvest one when it's fully mature and an adult, because bear meat is delicious. You can simultaneously hold these views as a hunter conservationist because you're not taking more than you need to. Usually people are harvesting only 1 or 2 bears a year in a lawful season. What a lot of these people and what this tattler did to rat on his classmates and try to put them in trouble, and thankfully the administration said, no, this was done lawfully, and even the conservation department confirmed that this was done lawfully. There was no wrongdoing happening. Good on Cornell University, because Cornell University's, like major institutions of higher learning, would be very hostile to hunting. But if you know that region, I've been there a handful of times, there is a hunting and fishing culture. Even in New York, you get outside New York City, there is still a prevailing hunting, fishing, conservationist ethos. And it's not surprising that the 2 Cornell students probably grew up in a hunting family and want to live out the lifestyle even as college students. I hope that they were able to teach their classmates through the skinning and other processing they did that this is natural. The bear meat is going to be consumed. It's not going to be wanton waste. The bear was respected. It was taken lawfully. We don't want to take more than we need to or can each season. And that is the teachable moment from here. But of course, there are people who just do not understand this. I think even with the 80% of people who can be swayable, there is that 20% camp, or there's a 10% camp, on the very virulent animal rights activist, anti-hunting space that you will never convince. I'm sorry to say this to my fellow hunters and anglers. You will never convince a lot of people in that 10%. And we have 10% who are solidly in favor of hunting. And again, that big 80% in the middle, which mathematically doesn't make sense, but about 80% of Americans, roughly, have no strong opinions about hunting or another. We have had great opportunities to sway people. And I think this but the incident of them trying to maliciously report and assign evil doing to these 2 students who, again, were lawful, were not taking a young yearling bear. They took a mature bear. They had their licenses. They did it lawfully in a county that permits bear hunting. And the teachable moment from here is that we should be normalizing hunting. And it's good that these students, if they ever do decide to come forward, we're doing it. And the fact that they were at risk of being canceled and exposed and embarrassed for doing something lawfully and that is American, to go hunting and being a conservationist, is preposterous. But good on the university administration for clamping down potential attacks on these 2 students. I could imagine that's why they're wanting to be private, and they should definitely have their privacy maintained for fear of retaliation, because these younger kids, younger animal rights activists, are extremely vicious. They could be borderline violent too, especially in wake of last week's tragic events. we have to be a little bit careful, but that doesn't mean you have to be silent to live out your lifestyle. But there are crazy people, and I understand these students wanting to have their privacy maintained. And like I said, kudos to Cornell University for not punishing these students. They did nothing wrong. And I hope more universities, if they have hunters as students, do not punish people for lawfully engaging in hunting, fishing, and shooting sports and the like. So I am a little bit encouraged if we're talking about universities where Charlie Kirk was going to universities, getting people to engage in debate, even in these energy, climate, and hunting conservation issues too. I would have hoped, had he still been around, that he would have talked more about this. And perhaps I've missed some video clips where he did, and I regret not watching those, and maybe I'll come through and see those. But we wanted to make this kind of a campus-focused episode about like how important free speech, freedom of association to be a hunter is too, with the example of these 2 Cornell students, hunters, that you shouldn't be ostracized for doing things lawfully. Free speech is protected. Hunting is allowed if you are licensed. Nobody's perspectives should be infringed upon or responded to with violent means. And I hope those who disagree with hunting understand that and want to engage in good faith and don't resort to violent means. We have seen some radical environmentalists and animal rights activists resort to violence in the past, and I hope that they learn from the recent events not to do this and to tone down the rhetoric. I think everyone can tone down the rhetoric, but especially them, because they tend to be a little violent, more so than we are. We try to be peaceful, and we try to be working in sync and change people's hearts and minds. And the thing you have to do as a hunter, conservationist, angler, shooting sports enthusiast, Second Amendment defender is to engage in debate earnestly, honestly, calmly, either to win over hearts and minds or just to get your perspective out there. That's a thing I fully believe as both a conservative and a conservationist. I think that's what we have to take away from the recent events with both of the stories that I've discussed here today on the show. And I hope you'll enjoy me in honoring Charlie's legacy with engaging in good faith debate, bringing the conservation perspective out there to more audiences as peacefully and strongly and boldly as you can. And same with fishing and shooting sports. We can bring people to our side. And if not, we can at least have a good faith debate and get people at least to be open-minded a little bit. But that's what's really important. That's what's truly Americana, that we can engage in debate. We can share different perspectives. Actor Henry Winkler, let me round out with saying this. Henry Winkler, who tends to lean to the left, loves to post fly fishing pictures. And I think we could borrow the spirit of him. And he said something to the effect that if more people went fishing, we'd have fewer arguments and disagreements. And I'm going to link to that exact post that he made, but I totally agree with that. Time in the outdoors, you can bond with people who you don't politically agree with, socioeconomically might differ from, whatever your life circumstance. If you find yourself in the great outdoors and you meet someone with different perspective, it's a good opportunity to get to know them. And I have found great kinship and fellowship with people who come from different walks of life from me in fly fishing, hunting, shooting sports, and the like. And I wish that we would see the same in politics. And I hope we can take that same ethos we have in the conservation space to bring people together, to gather together in the great outdoors. We need to see more of that in politics. And that's what I want to take away from Mr. Henry Winkler to round out this episode. But I know it's a heavy week, but go forward boldly and make the case for conservation. If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.